Hi there, do you want to learn how to study the Bible? To get to know God better, to hear him speaking to you? Do you want to get to know his son, Jesus Christ, through the power of the Holy Spirit? Maybe you have been confused in the past about studying the Bible. Maybe you have been challenged, you found it difficult. Well, please put your fears and concerns to one side because we're going to show you how you can do it. Hi and welcome back to Bytes of Holiness. This is Nigel and Molly here from Precept UK. We have finished our actual study on the book of Jude in our last program, and we have seen how the called and beloved of God are kept for Jesus Christ and how they are to contend earnestly for the faith, because there are the ungodly who have crept in unnoticed. It's practical and it's a compassionate book, and it's full of exhortation and instruction how we can do it. So today we're going to finish off on day 6. We only completed half of that day. We left off the very end of the instruction on day 6. So we're going to complete the at-a-glance chart. Now we know that sometimes people find it difficult to do this. It's just a tool. It's just another way of helping you to get to know God, to study the Bible. And it takes a little bit of practice, but it is so worthwhile. Now, please make sure that you pray before you start this program. So let's
just at the end of day 6, the last program, it just said, finally, fill in your Jude at a glance chart on page 112, and you will have a nice summary of the content of Jude. And as we go through this and help you complete it, you will see how valuable this is. For those of you that have one of our Inductive Study Bibles, every book of the Bible, all 66 books, has got one of these at-a-glance charts at the end of it. And we have found it so helpful, I have to tell you, in our study of the Bible.
Yeah.
So let's take you through how we complete an at-a-glance chart for the book of Jude.
Now, so you need to turn to page, let's find out which page it is. It's page 112 in your book. And in the New Inductive Study Bible series, every book of the Bible, you're going to have a chart. Now, I'm going to actually use the chart. So if we can just, there we go. First top tip is to complete it in pencil. Now, I know that that is not going to be so easy for you to see on the screen, but at the end, I'm going to show you an example that is typed up. And the reason why I say that is because you may want to refine it as you go back and read it again. You may want to refine your answers. And I just always find that if I'm doing a chart like this, that I like to use a pencil because then I can erase it easily. If you want to use a pen and you see that there's something that needs to be fine-tuned, you can always use Tipp-Ex if you want to do that. Anyway, that's just my first top tip. So let's look at what it says. So that this is the chart that we are given. And we've already completed who the author is. We did that earlier on in our study, and we've seen that in verse 1, we know that it is Jude. And we know the purpose for the book of Jude, and we saw that in verse 3, that Titus felt the necessity to write to them, appealing that they contend earnestly for the faith, which was once for all handed down to the saints. And there's another, so there's not enough space really to write all that out, so I just literally summarize it by putting verse 3. But we also know that verse 4 is part of that appeal, because he's telling them that certain persons have crept in unnoticed. So I'm adding verse 4 there. And I think also we also see that in verse 5, Jude is desiring to remind them about certain things. And in one of our later lessons, we also had to look at that phrase in verse 17 where it says, "But you, beloved, ought to remember." So there is this sense that he's reminding and asking them to remember. So you could put down verse 5 and verse 17 as well if you wanted to do that under the purpose to remind them to remember certain things. And let's just first of all now go to the key words. Go down a little bit further there, key words. Now, some of the key words that we have marked. And so we've marked words such as judgment. So just put judgment. and also punishment. I did notice earlier when I was reading my observation worksheet again that I didn't colour the word judgment in, so punishment in. So I'm just going to quickly go and do that. So if you just follow with me here, if you look on verse 7, I did the eternal fire, but it's punishment of eternal fire. So I'm just going to colour that in there. And I think there was also another one somewhere. I can't see where it is now. If we see it, maybe it was just it. Okay, so anyway, punishment, judgment, those were key words. So let's just make sure that we have marked them and that we have made a note of them on our at-a-glance chart. And you'll find that as you go through the book, more and more you will actually see things that you have missed, and then you'll be able to mark them and add them to your lists as you go through. So we've got ungodly as well. That's another key word. It's a group of people and it's a description of their behavior. And then we've also marked the words kept and keep. Those are other key words. And let's not forget the word beloved, the description of the people that Jude is writing to. And then I'm just going to write down remind and remember. So those are some key words. That's where we're going to list it. Now, under historical setting, let's just look at that. What's been going on at this time? What's been going on at this time in history?
Well, we see in verse 4 particularly that certain persons have crept in unnoticed. Mm-hmm. And then it goes on, the rest of verse 4, to talk about what they've done, and then a lot more about them in verses 8 on and towards the end of the letter. So what is the historical setting? The historical setting is that there have been some ungodly men that have crept into their meetings unnoticed. So I think that's probably a really good summary of what the historical setting is. Now you'll notice on this chart, the at-a-glance chart, there's not a huge amount of space to write down a whole lot of information there. Hence the term at-a-glance chart. That's exactly what it is. It's an at-a-glance chart. Mm-hmm. So you want to write something down there that's just going to remind you, oh yeah, I remember, that's the setting, that's the historical setting. So that's, I think,
yeah, and
that sort of summarizes it. Really.
Yeah, and maybe perhaps the purpose is it is verse 4 there. Yeah. That's what's been going on. Now let us go over to paragraph themes. Now this is something that is going to well, it's breaking down these verses into bite-sized chunks, if you like. Now remember that paragraphs are man-made. Let's look at the first 2 verses. So look at your observation worksheets, and the idea is to have a summary of what the main thing is, what's the main subject of these first couple of verses. And in a letter, it's just really just making mention of who is writing and who's being written to. And so we see in verse 1, it's Jude, and he's writing to the called. Now, again, as Nigel said, there's not a huge amount of space, but you could write Jude to the called, or the called, the beloved, and the kept. But let's just write down in there, Jude to the called. To the called. So it's a main summary of that first paragraph. Now looking at verses 3 and 4, you need to think about what is the main thing that's been talked about. So how would you summarize verses 3 and 4?
Okay, so I picked out the phrase appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith as part of it, because I thought that was really important, and then just that the ungodly have crept in unnoticed.
Okay, so it's just the essence of those 2 verses. So let's put that down. So appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith, and I'm just going to put a hyphen there, the ungodly have crept in. Okay, you just about see that. Appealing that you can turn earnestly for the faith, the ungodly have crept in.
Yeah.
Verses 5 to 7. Now these are interesting verses, aren't they? Because it's looking back, he says, I desire to remind you, and he's reminding them about these sort of different groups, really. So I think that we need to look at the key words. You've got destroyed, judgment, punishment in here. And so I think one way of summarizing this could be, and by the way, there is a wrong way to summarize a paragraph theme, and that wrong way would be to talk about something that's got nothing to do with what's going on in the paragraph. But there is more than one right way of actually writing a paragraph summary. But what you would want to do is try and use words from the text, your keywords, because the repeated keywords are going to help you to understand what the main subject is. Yeah. So I think the way that I might summarize these verses is by saying, remind you about peoples destroyed, angels judged, and cities punished. Okay, so we see in verse 5, you've got peoples who are destroyed, you've got in verse 6 angels who are judged, and you've got cities who are punished. So again, you may choose to word it slightly differently than me, and that's absolutely fine. But let's just write that down. Remind you, or remind them, which is fine, remind them about peoples destroyed, angels judged, oops, can't spell, that's why I use pencil, angels judged, and cities punished. Okay, can you see that? Remind you, or remind them about peoples destroyed, angels judged, and cities punished. Next paragraph is verses 18 to 13. So what's the focus of these verses?
The focus is on the ungodly, really, and what they've done. Comparison verse 14 with some similar situations in the Old Testament, and some very descriptive analogies, if you like, verses 12 and 13. So it's, and you can see it very quickly from having marked them, that is really what it's about, or who's it about. But also we see the word destroyed and perished and black darkness that are repeated as well. So a combination of the two would probably be a good summary. Now, you can't write it all out, so you've got to really look at it and try and pick up a phrase, maybe a sentence or phrase or part of a sentence that's going to summarize the essence of what the paragraph is about. That's really what you're looking to do. So it does take a little bit of reading, a bit of praying, right? What element of this paragraph is going to work to summarize it?
And the phrase, if you were to look at your observation worksheet, we've marked the ungodly men, but there is a phrase which is used to describe them. Verse 8, these men. Verse 10, these men. Verse 12, these are the men. Verse 14, so we're not going to verse 14, sorry, we'll ignore that. Themselves, verse 12. So I think I'm going to use that phrase, these men, somehow. But we see, as Nigel said, you can't get it all in. So perhaps we can do something like the black darkness, because that's one of the descriptions of the punishment. The black darkness has been reserved for these men. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to put down. The black darkness has been reserved for these men. Okay, that's what it's about. And if you weren't quite sure who these men were, you could always put brackets, the ungodly, after that. So verses 14 to 16. Now, here we've got this interesting little nugget of information about Enoch, who prophesied. So how would you summarize these verses? 14
Okay, well
to 16?
again, you're right. It's talking about these men that Enoch prophesied about them, but also in verse 15 it talks about judgment coming. So I think something about Enoch, something about prophesying judgment on these men.
Okay.
So maybe Enoch prophesied judgment about these men would be a sensible summary.
All right. So Enoch prophesied judgment
About these men. For those of you who are really detailed people, just a little bit of a warning. We've got somebody in one of our Precept groups that is just delightful, but she just loves writing all the detail that she sees and finds it really difficult to come up with a concise summary for something like a paragraph theme or a chapter theme. So I would just exhort you to think of yourselves looking down on it and say, well, how am I best going to summarize this using the words from the text? That's really what we're seeking to do. You're not looking to write it all out. You can't do that. It's not the purpose of it. It's just what's the essence of the paragraph, and then write that down, and that's really going to help you.
Okay, verses 17 to 23, there was a switch, wasn't there? We're now instead of so many brown boxes, we've now got a lot more orange, talking about the beloved. And so here we can also see that there are a number of instructions. And I think the key instruction when we were discussing it was keep yourselves in the love of God in verse 21. So I think the way that we could summarize these instructions is instructions to the beloved. And we see that then mentioned a couple of times. Keep yourselves in the love of God. So I'm just going to use that as my summary. Instructions to the beloved or beloved. Keep yourself in the love of God. And then finally, last couple of verses 24 to 25, the focus is on God here. And what is it that God is able to do?
He is able to keep you from stumbling and to make you stand in his presence. So
God is able to keep you, and to God it says be glory, dominion and authority, majesty, etc. So that's a bit of, I think, it's like a song of praise to God, isn't it, at the end? But so I'm going to just summarize that by saying God is able to keep you, and to God be glory. So God is able to keep you. Now remember, keep is a key word, so that's why I want to have that in there. God is able to keep you, and to God be glory. All right, good. So we've got our paragraph summaries, and so if you look down your list, you can see a quick summary of what each one of them is about. Now, let's just quickly look at what this column here is. It's called segment divisions, and often people really struggle with this, and it's just another tool, just another way of helping to divide up the book. And so look at your summaries and see if you can group any of them together. And I think one way that we could do that is to see that verses 5 down to verse 16 essentially are about the ungodly. Whoops, I'm not showing you very clearly on that. So 5 to 7 to 16 is really about the ungodly. And the first 4 verses really, Jude is explaining his reason for writing. So I would just put here, verses 1 to 4, I put reason for writing. And then I would rule off, probably with a nice neat ruler, which I haven't got here. And then rule off here, because this is the end of the segment that's talking really about the ungodly. And I think this section here, we're talking about, remind you about people, so that's past people who have gone through judgment. And it's also a warning for the people today that the black darkness has been reserved. And I think there's also future judgment here, isn't there? So the way that we could describe it is past, present and future judgment for the ungodly. So past, present and future judgment for the ungodly. And you can see you have to write quite small on that list. And then the last section, the focus again is back to the beloved. It's the focus is on God. And so I think with such I think a challenging letter, a really warning letter, quite a sobering letter, Jude wants to ensure that his readers are encouraged by the time they finish. So I think these are instructions and encouragements. Instructions, oops, can't spell, and encouragements. You can't even read that, I bet. To the beloved. So instructions and encouragements to the beloved. So you would want to just do those segment divisions, and so it just shows you it's another way of breaking up the book. And then finally, what is the theme of Jude at the top? What is talked about the most? What is this book all about? And there could be a couple of ways that we could summarize that. How would you summarize this book? What would you put?
I put down, well, okay, so when we talk about the theme, I have in my mind, what's it all about? What's the book all about? How would you summarize it to someone perhaps that doesn't know what Jude is about? And so I put down my theme as beloved, because we see beloved throughout the book. Contend for the faith.
Okay. The beloved to contend
for the faith, but also I wanted to bring in some of what you said just a moment ago about being kept and encouragement. So maybe and kept by God. So beloved, contend for the faith and kept by God. And you can put down the verses next to those if you want. Verse 3 and verse 24.
So that would just beautifully summarize what the book is about, wouldn't it? I think there's another way that you could put it down. You could talk about the beloved and the ungodly. You can talk about them being eternally saved and eternally punished, because those words are used in the text as well. So that's an alternative way of doing it. So you could put beloved, I put this in brackets actually, beloved and the ungodly. The beloved are eternally saved, and the ungodly are eternally punished. So that's what the book of Jude is about. But it's a 25 verses long, but it packs a punch. It covers an awful lot of ground, lot of history, and obviously we've done some cross-references in the Old Testament. But I think you will be very pleased with yourself. You've worked very hard to really understand this little book. We've just completed a survey study of it. Now let me just show you. I've got a neater version of that here. Let's see if this makes it any clearer for you. There you go. So Jude to the called, appealing that they contend earnestly for the faith. The ungodly have crept in. And you can see that segment division more clearly on the left-hand side. Then you've got this segment, verses 5 to 16, with the different paragraphs here. The focus is on the ungodly men, and then right at the end, you've got this segment here, instructions and encouragements to the beloved, and the two separate paragraphs. And then over to the side, you've got your key words, etc. And then finishing with the book theme at the top. There you go. So that is your at-a-glance chart. That's how you would complete it.
I think one of the things I don't think that we've done necessarily yet is to, you can rule off the paragraphs on your observation worksheets. So having summarised the paragraphs there, you can then go to the text, the Bible text itself. And
so this is just what Nigel is talking about here. So we're not going to do it all now because of time. But what you would do is, again,
you rule off the paragraphs.
Nigel likes to make that really clear. That helps him to really see. I would just simply just do verses 1 to 2, and then I would just put Jude to the called. Okay, Jude to the called, and then there you can just about see that there. And then I just underline it so that it just stands out a little bit more. And then when you get down to verse 3, you would just then, where's verse 3? Here we go, let me show you. Okay, beloved, there we go. So we just write down against verse 3 here, and it's verses 3 to 4, and that was appealing. You'd write the whole summary of your verse down. Of your paragraph. So I'm not going to write it all out, but you get the idea. And that's just verses 3 to 4. And that's just another top tip for you. You can just do that in your margins.
Also, depending again what your observation sheet looks like, you can write down the chapter theme
at the top of your page
as well.
Yeah, that's right. And so you've just got a complete summary of your study.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you've got one of the new Inductive Study Series, if you've got one of our new International Study Bibles, is that what they're called? I should know. Inductive, not international. New Inductive Study Bibles. As Nigel said, you've got all the charts are in there as well. You can complete all those charts. So you've got your at a glance at hand. So when you want to come back to Jude to tell somebody else about it, you know all about it.
Yeah. Now we're going to be. We've got one more program in the series on Jude, day 7. But it is always worthwhile to stop at the end of any discussions that we've had and just review maybe what we've done and give a time for God to talk to us
and to pray.
So you can do that now. You can look at your chart. You can see what it is that God wants to speak to you about. His word is powerful, very powerful. So I would encourage you to do that now. And join us at the next program, which will be our day 7, questions for discussion or individual study if you're not in a group. So thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next program.